You're listening to Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions on product and business strategy. And now, here's your host, Bob Caporelli.
Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product and business strategy. Real questions from real people in real companies, just like yours. Welcome back, strategy creators, and welcome back especially our podcast authors and listeners. We are now in part 4 of our 5-part series on understanding the target market for your products or your podcast. And again, we're using podcasting as kind of the baseline for these episodes based on a speech that I did at the PodFest Multimedia Expo back at the beginning of March. I promised that audience that I would dedicate 5 episodes in the month of April, the entire month of April, to this subject of finding the target audience for your podcast. And that's what we've been doing. So we are in part 4. Again, if you're not a podcaster, fear not. This subject of finding your target audience, just translate it right into finding the target market for your products or services. And it's the exact same discussion, which is why I thought it would be appropriate to feature it on this show. So in episode 1 or part 1, we covered the general overview of finding a target market and understanding why that's important. In part 2 of that series, we covered the concept of TAM, SAM, and SOM, which is basically breaking down your market into reasonable chunks so you can go after them and understand, kind of who you want to acquire and why it's important. The third episode, we talked about customer segmentation, which really involves moving from your TAM to your SAM, and really grouping customers based on similar needs so that you can turn them into target markets rather than just, treating every market the same. So that brings us to this week's episode, which is going to be about moving from your SAM to your SOM and doing that by understanding the target markets that you've chosen through your segmentation. So I'm going to pause here because if you're lost on any of this stuff or it's confusing or whatever else, don't worry. All you need to do is go back and listen to episodes 81, 82, and 83, or go out to dearstrategy.net and click on the blog link, or dearstrategy.net/blog gets you there as well. And you can read the blogs that I've written for each of those episodes as well. As always, I write a blog for every episode that we do here. It's not just a show notes kind of a thing. It's an actual written article on the subject that I'm covering. So be sure and check that out. It'll catch you right up and it'll take you to today's episode, which is going to be one of 2 tools that I'm going to recommend to help you really convert parts of your target market into actual listeners of your show or consumers of your product. And the first of those tools that we're going to cover is what is commonly referred to as personas. Now, this term personas, I can't say for sure if it was around before it was popularized in the marketing space, but it was popularized in a book called The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. A noted software designer named Alan Cooper wrote this book. And one of the concepts that he outlines is this concept of developing personas. Now, in that book, the concept was really targeted towards, hey, if you're developing a piece of software, make sure you know exactly who you're developing it for, because it's going to help you to design something that's going to meet their needs, right? Help you to outthink the user in some ways. And what he recommended there was that you really take who it's designed for and assign a face and a name and an age and make it for one singular person. The idea being that one singular person is going to probably represent a lot of people. But if you try and keep, your design way too broad and design it for too broad of a market, what's going to end up happening is that you're going to design, something that doesn't meet the needs of any one person individually, right? Whereas if you pick a persona, then at least you're designing it for that one person and you're banking on the fact that there's a lot of other people that are just like that person. And that by and large is true. I've always joked, even since I was, in high school, right, that there's 10 types of people in the world. I'm sure there's variations on that. I'm sure I didn't make it up, but at the end of the day, there really is there's 10 basic personalities that I've run into in my life. And so this basically is the same concept. Now, when you apply personas to, more of the marketing realm instead of the software development realm, what people will typically do is take those segments that we talked about last week and represent each segment with a persona. And they give that persona a face and a name and an age and all those different things that we talked about. A lot of times people will actually take pictures of their customer. More commonly, they use a stock image like I do, right? Because it's already released and available. But you're trying to embody the segment in a person, right? So last week I told you that I have for my podcast essentially 4 segments that I'm targeting, which are in essence product managers, business leaders, strategy consultants, and business students all in North America, right? So that's kind of my 4 big segments. Well, I'll tell you that I have developed personas for each of those segments as well. So for example, one of my personas for product managers is someone named PM Paula, right? She's 30 years old. She lives in Austin, Texas. She has a Bachelor of Science and an MBA. She's engaged. She doesn't have children. She's into fitness and social media and entrepreneurship. And then I go on to list what her characteristics are with respect to her needs to my show. So I have a section for podcast habits. I say that she listens to podcasts while working out during her 30-minute commute. And she wants to be entertained during the workouts and educated during the commutes, right? Her career goals, she wants to manage a PM team and eventually start her own software or service business. She's interested in strategy for the dual purpose of excelling in her company and learning how to start her own business. And her personal goals, she wants to start a family someday, wants to continue her career while she does. She's interested in learning how to balance her personal life and career aspirations. And that's, part of the learning that she wants to get from any type of a podcast that she's listening to for educational purposes. So you get the idea, right? Is that particular person represents product managers. Now, I will tell you that there is a shortcoming in my opinion, at least, in trying to represent your segment with one persona. And a lot of people try and do that. I find that to be pretty limiting, to be honest with you, because even though many of you probably just related to PM Paula, and as far as her habits with respect to my show, they're probably translate into a lot of people that don't look or act or have the same demographics as her. But I still find it to be a little limiting when I'm trying to represent such a large segment with just one person. So I actually have several personas for each of my market segments. So another one that I've developed for product managers is PM Pete, right? So he's 40 years old. He's in New York. He's got a Bachelor of Arts degree. He's married with 2 children. He likes sports. He likes family. He likes electronic gadgets. His podcast habits are a little different than Paula, right? He listens to podcasts mainly on his long commute, and his commute's pretty long because he lives in the suburbs. So he's got about an hour each way. He doesn't, work out generally, so he's not listening to podcasts in the gym. But when he is listening to podcasts on the train and so forth, he is interested in education and career. So that's a little bit different, right? His career goals, he's actually currently managing a small team of product managers. He wants to stay with his company, but he's really more passionate about working for a company that he loves than he is about moving into executive positions or moving around or starting his own business. That might be nice, but he really cares more about working for a company that cares about him, right? And his goal, family is the most important thing to him right now. So he's currently right in that area of trying to balance his work and his life, right? And so that's really, really important to him. He spends a lot of time with his kids. He wants to go to their sports events, everything else, but he also wants to have a career that's interesting and exciting and pays the bills. So you could see that, they're both in the same segment. They do have different needs. And so trying to assign one persona to this bigger segment of product managers, I find to be a little limiting. So I actually have 2 or 3 personas for each segment. Some people will say, well, that's too much. It goes against the purpose. Says who, right? It works for me. So what this does though, is rather than just kind of having a nameless, faceless, segment called product managers, this allows me to kind of dig deeper into who are those people, what do they care about, and what do they want from a show like the one I'm providing. Now, this gets down to understanding their true needs with respect to a podcast or whatever product you're selling. And that allows me to convert more of my SAM or serviceable addressable market into my SOM, or serviceable obtainable market, which essentially represents growing my market share over time, right? So that's how you would use this. So that's the idea of personas. And I would, again, have a couple of these for each of my segments that we talked about last week. And that really just allows me to put a face and a name to this thing. I've actually gone into companies where they have their personas, turned into posters, or in one case, I heard of a company that turns it into cardboard cutouts, and they put them all over their building, right? So that when you go into the building, you're right in front of the customers. You know who they are, you know what they look like, you know what they stand for, and that helps you to develop your product around their needs, right? Which comes back to the whole purpose of this 5-part series is don't just develop a product based on what you care about, develop a product based on what your actual audience or market cares about. Understand their needs, understand who they are, set realistic goals. So now you can provide a product that addresses their needs, and that product is going to be much more successful than if you didn't do that. Okay. So that's the idea behind personas. Next week, we're going to talk about one more tool that I use, one that I created, in fact, but I think it could be really useful. And that's called the Market Team Card. So tune in for part 5, the last part in this series, to learn more about that. In the meantime, please go out and visit the sponsor of our show's website. And also, this is the company that I work for, the company I founded. It's called Strategy Generation Company, and we provide workshops and tools and training on all of these subjects that we're talking about on this show. So please go visit us at strategygeneration.com. I'm sure you're going to find a lot of useful information there. Also, please subscribe to the show if you're enjoying what you're listening to, or if you haven't subscribed already. We'd love to have you as a regular listener, so you could do that at dearstrategy.net, where you'll also find our blog, or of course, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and all the places where podcasts are found. Okay. While you're doing all that, don't forget to make time for the plan, and we'll see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for listening to Dear Strategy with Bob Caparelli. To learn more or to submit a question to be featured on our show, please visit us at dearstrategy.net.